they're killing him. Who thinks that? Yes. Tell us why. Stand up.
I think that Parker would be killed with the hope that the other crew members would be rescued. So there's no definite reason that he should be killed because you don't know when they're going to get rescued. So if you kill him, it's killing him in vain. Do you keep killing a crew member until you're rescued and then you're left with no one? Because someone's going to die eventually.
Well, the moral logic of the situation seems to be that they would keep on picking off the weakest, maybe, one by one, until they were rescued. And in this case, luckily, they were rescued when 3 at least were still alive. Now, if Parker did give his consent, would it be all right, do you think, or not?
No.
No.
It still wouldn't be right.
And tell us why it wouldn't be all right.
First of all, cannibalism, I believe, is morally incorrect. So you shouldn't be eating a human anyway.
So cannibalism is morally objectionable as such. So then, even on the scenario of waiting until someone died, still it would be objectionable.
Yes, to me personally. I feel like it all depends on one's personal morals. And, like, we can't sit here and just, like, this is just my opinion. Of course, other people are going to disagree. But
well, we'll see. Let's see what their disagreements are, and then we'll see if they have reasons that can persuade you or not. Let's try that. All right. Let's, now, is there someone who can explain, those of you who are tempted by consent, can you explain why consent makes such a moral difference? What about the lottery idea? Does that count as consent? Remember, at the beginning, Dudley proposed a lottery. Suppose that they had agreed to a lottery, then how many would then say it was all right? Suppose there were a lottery, cabin boy lost, and the rest of the story unfolded. Then how many people would say it was morally permissible? So the numbers are rising if we had a lottery. Let's hear from one of you for whom the lottery would make a moral difference. Why would it?
I think the essential element in my mind that makes it a crime is the idea that they decided at some point that their lives were more important than his, and that, I mean, that's kind of the basis for really any crime, right? It's like, my needs, my desires are more important than yours, and mine take precedent. And if they had done a lottery where everyone consented that someone should die, and it's sort of like they're all sacrificing themselves to save the rest,
then it would be all right.
A little grotesque, but...
But morally permissible?
Yes.
And what's your name?
Matt.
So, Matt, for you, what bothers you is not the cannibalism, but the lack of due process.
I guess you could say that.
Right? And can someone who agrees with Matt say a little bit more about why a lottery would make it, in your view, morally permissible? Go ahead.
The way I understood it originally was that was the whole issue, is that the cabin boy was never consulted about whether or not something was going to happen to him, even with the original lottery, whether or not he would be a part of that. It was just decided that he was the one that was going to die.
Right, that's what happened in the actual case.
Right.
But if there were a lottery and they'd all agreed to the procedure, you think that would be okay?
Right, because then everyone knows that there's going to be a death. Whereas, you know, the cabin boy didn't know that this discussion was even happening. There was no, you know, forewarning for him to know that, hey, I may be the one that's dying.
All right, now suppose everyone agrees to the lottery, they have the lottery, the cabin boy loses, and he changes his mind.
You've already decided. It's like a verbal contract. You can't go back on that. You've decided, the decision was made. You know, if you know that you're dying for the, you know, the reason for others to live, you would, if someone else had died, you know that you would consume them, so that's
right. But then he could say, I know, but I lost.
I just think that that's the whole moral issue, is that there was no consulting of the cabin boy, and that that's what makes it the most horrible, is that he had no idea what was even going on. That had he known what was going on, it would be a bit more understandable.
All right, good. Now I want to hear, so there are some who think it's morally permissible, but only about 20%, led by Marcus. Then there are some who say the real problem here is the lack of consent, whether the lack of consent to a lottery, to a fair procedure, or, Kathleen's idea, lack of consent at the moment of death. And if we add consent, then more people are willing to consider the sacrifice morally justified. I want to hear now, finally, from those of you who think even with consent, even with a lottery, even with a final murmur of consent by Parker at the very last moment, it would still be wrong. And why would it be wrong? That's what I want to hear. Yes?
Well, the whole time I've been leaning all towards the categorical moral reasoning. And I think that there's a possibility I'd be okay with the idea of a lottery and then the loser taking into their own hands to kill themselves, so that there wouldn't be, an act of murder. But I still think that even that way it's coerced. And also I don't think that there's any remorse. Like in Dudley's diary, we were eating our breakfast. It seems as though he's just sort of like, the whole idea of not valuing someone else's life. So that makes me feel like I have to take the categorical.
You want to throw the
stand.
book at him when he lacks remorse or a sense of having done anything wrong.
Right.
So, all right, good. Any other defenders of who say it's just categorically wrong, with or without consent? Yes, stand up. Why?
I think undoubtedly the way our society is shaped, murder is murder. Murder is murder in every way, and our society looks at murder down on it in the same light, and I don't think it's any different in any case.
Good. Let me ask you a question. There were 3 lives at stake versus 1.
Okay.
The one, the cabin boy, he had no family, he had no dependents. These other 3 had families back home in England. They had dependents. They had wives and children. Think back to Bentham. Bentham says we have to consider the welfare, the utility, the happiness of everybody. We have to add it all up. So it's not just numbers 3 against 1. It's also all of those people at home. In fact, the London newspaper at the time and popular opinion sympathized with them, Dudley and Stephens. And the paper said if they weren't motivated by affection and concern for their loved ones at home and their dependents, surely they wouldn't have done this.
Yeah, and how is that any different from people on a corner trying to have the same desire to feed their family? I don't think it's any different. I think in any case, if I'm murdering you to advance my status, that's murder, and I think that we should look at that all in the same light instead of criminalizing certain activities and making certain things seem more violent and savage, when in the same case it's all the same. It's all the same act and mentality that goes into murder, necessity to feed your family. So
suppose it weren't 3, suppose it were 30, 300. 1 life to save 300. Or in wartime, 3,000.
Okay.
Suppose the stakes are even bigger.
Suppose the stakes are even bigger. I think it's still the same deal.
Do you think Bentham is wrong to say the right thing to do is to add up the collective happiness? You think he's wrong about that?
I don't think he's wrong, but I think murder is murder in any case.
Yeah, well, then Bentham has to be wrong. If you're right, he's wrong.
Okay, then he's wrong.
All right.
Right.
Thank you. Well done. All right, let's step back from this discussion and notice how many objections have we heard to what they did. We heard some defenses of what they did. The defenses had to do with necessity, their dire circumstance, and, implicitly at least, the idea that numbers matter. And not only numbers matter, but the wider effects matter. Their families back home, their dependents. Parker was an orphan. No one would miss him. So if you add up, if you try to calculate the balance of happiness and suffering, you might have a case for saying what they did was the right thing. And then we heard at least 3 different types of objections. We heard an objection that said, what they did was categorically wrong. Mike here at the end, categorically wrong. Murder is murder, it's always wrong, even if it increases the overall happiness of society. A categorical objection. But we still need to investigate why murder is categorically wrong. Is it because even cabin boys have certain fundamental rights? And if that's the reason, where do those rights come from, if not from some idea of the larger welfare or utility or happiness? Question number one. Others said a lottery would make a difference. A fair procedure, Matt said. And some people were swayed by that. That's not a categorical objection exactly. It's saying everybody has to be counted as an equal, even though at the end of the day, one can be sacrificed for the general welfare. That leaves us with another question to investigate. Why does agreement to a certain procedure, even a fair procedure, justify whatever result flows from the operation of that procedure? Question number two. And question number three, the basic idea of consent. Kathleen got us onto this. If the cabin boy had agreed himself, and not under duress, as was added, then it would be all right to take his life to save the rest. And even more people signed on to that idea. But that raises a third philosophical question. What is the moral work that consent does? Why does an act of consent make such a moral difference that an act that would be wrong, taking a life without consent, is morally permissible with consent? To investigate those three questions, we're going to have to read some philosophers. And starting next time, we're going to read Bentham and John Stuart Mill, utilitarian philosophers.
Don't miss the chance to interact online with other viewers of Justice. Join the conversation, take a pop quiz, watch lectures you've missed, and learn a lot more. Visit justiceharvard.org. It's the right thing to do. Funding for this program is provided by... Additional funding provided by